It's not automatic. I'm gonna start over.
So Pete, where are we starting with this? So we're in the work session.
We're in the work session. We're starting with multifamily design standards, and we're gonna go through.
Okay, I thought we were going to, at this meeting, we were going to take a step backwards and start talking about the comprehensive plan.
Okay,
So
We
the other
do
thing
that.
I have to ask is, since there's been a request, we
Yep.
need, as a planning commission, to make a determination before we get much further, because it is 8:26 according to
Fair
that watch, and mine says 8:26. So what is your pleasure tonight for how long you are planning to be in this work session? Because I don't want to infringe upon anybody by us continuing, and then people say, oh, I thought we were going to adjourn. So let's take 2 minutes and make that decision right now.
I have no problem going till 10.
What is
But
your pleasure?
10:01 is a different one.
Earlier is always appreciated. See the kids.
I would,
thank you.
I can fit up to 10.
Yeah, I mean, if we economize our discussion on this, sure, we'll do 10. I just don't want to go long.
Zach, you're the deciding.
Earlier than 10 is nice.
I would concur with
Yeah,
your
I agree too.
opinion.
Shall we go shoot for 9:30 with a possible 10 if we're doing good?
A buffer to 10,
Yeah.
9:30, 10.
That sounds reasonable.
Okay. So you got 1 hour to convince us to approve everything. Go for it.
I don't think that's happening tonight,
Maybe the way
really.
you get it.
You guys are pretty careless.
So, yeah, like we said, the comprehensive plan, goals and policies, not every single one of them is up here. We just chose to use the ones that we felt were most relevant to the code amendments that we have before you. Goal one, obviously citizen involvement, we will have findings to that effect that summarize the project advisory team and the various meetings that we've held and the public notices and surveys and all the other input that we received over time as well. So I'm not going to present findings.
Oh, no, we're not,
Yeah,
no, we're not
yeah.
interested in findings.
Yeah, do you want me to just run back through these slides real quick and just do us?
I think as we had discussed, we need to be a little more grounded.
Sure.
And if I'm channeling Mr. Mahoney, Bob, if you're watching at home, I'm doing what you asked.
So,
Grounding us in the basis for the bigger picture before we start getting into
Yeah.
the small picture, which is the detail.
I would say that, based on the initial impetus to do this project came from the city commission goals and policies. And the desire to review our codes and policies and remove barriers. And then when we started looking into our comprehensive plan, goals and policies, in particular, the ones related to housing, which is chapter 10, I realized that they were extremely pertinent to the proposals that we had come forward with over the course of the project. So that's an important basis for any proposal to change the code is to look at how it's impacting housing. We have, we've defined equitable housing for the purposes of this project as a diversity of housing in locations that are suitable to a variety of income groups and ranges in proximity to public facilities and services. So, and that ties into some of our public facilities policies, like 11.1.6 and that sort of thing. And in particular, the need for the project was developed out of a well-known awareness of the price of housing related to a lack of supply of housing in the Portland metro area. That said, there is balance required in our comprehensive plan. So it's important that we get this right for Oregon City. We've heard that from you guys on multiple occasions, and that it balances the needs to preserve existing neighborhoods in a way that respects their character. And that's why the generalized term for a lot of these policy and code changes is, particularly with respect to the residential types, is they create a housing supply for the missing middle. And these are housing types that we don't have a lot of in the city because we have about 71% of our housing is single-family detached. We haven't seen a lot of development of the other types of housing that we have permitted in our code, such as accessory dwelling units, and just provide more diversity across the spectrum. What's been difficult for staff is to predict how many of these units might be built if a property owner takes advantage of the code. So we've attempted and will present those estimates and long, thoughts to you on the 27th. But the point of the code amendments is to analyze the code in such a way that if you identify a barrier or something that could be a barrier based on what we've heard from the public, that we single that out and look at it and decide whether to amend it or not.
So let me ask you a question, because I wrote down a note here to myself. So it sounds like there was a beginning assumption, not with everything, but that there are some barriers. Now, I'd be curious to know what portion of our public, quote unquote public, is telling us that there are barriers, other than what, as staff, you are intuiting, if that's such a word, that there might be. So we've already allowed certain things. I mean, I know that we could probably use a few more Harris Lane developments, but I think my only concern about Harris Lane is it's all duplexes. Why isn't there, it probably wasn't cost effective to build, a duplex and then some other type of house and then a duplex so that it isn't all one type of unit. And unfortunately, because of economies of scale, that's what we're seeing. We're not seeing a variety of housing types, which is why, getting back to your point, we wanted to see some ability to do master planning so that you could have a variety of housing types. Because I think just having a 6,000 square foot lot does not allow for a variety of housing types. It just means you have a smaller house with a smaller lot. You're not getting anything else other than that. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming, again, that there were some assumptions that were made. I mean, we've got the soup to nuts people that are saying, have no requirements, no restrictions, just let us do whatever we want. And then we have the other end here, which is saying, wait a minute, we have standards and criteria for a reason.
It's like, why are you calling 3 and 4 plexes out versus just regular multifamily housing? Well, why did they get their own world?
Yeah, well, I think the best way to think about all these amendments is you have a set of use definitions and permissions based on the zone. And then you have a set of design standards particular to the unit type. So based on those two things, it's provides a framework for looking at the residential components. And the point is, for each unit type, there would be a review level. And in some cases, for the example, the 3 to 4 plexes, this is something we want to discuss with you. Some people feel strongly that that is something that can be adequately designed with a set of clear and objective criteria, and therefore is small enough that it could be approved as a over-the-counter permit. And other people feel that it should have a type 2 design review process. So,
And that all depends upon how good those standards are.
and how good those design standards are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we discuss
And
the
what they
design
are.
criteria.
I would agree.
Discuss the use permissions by zone. But I think the design criteria are absolutely critical.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think Oregon
That's-
City, as I've said many times, that Oregon City needs to set a standard about what's appropriate for us, and it's not a free-for-all. We are not like everybody else in the metro area. We are really, really different. And I don't understand why people don't understand that. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron. Our community is not like all the others. And I think there's something unique and special, which is why people do move here. So they are looking for something just a little bit different, and we do have it. So to just allow whatever the housing is today is, I don't know what that means. I don't think, my opinion as a resident is that's not appropriate. It shouldn't just be whatever. Otherwise, we're gonna end up in those neighborhoods like Portland where all of a sudden you have a nice house, and then you have a box. I mean, what's,
Right.
Or a really tall skinny house.
yeah.
So to summarize, we feel that the direction given to us from the city commission and from the comprehensive plan is sufficient for this project to move forward to a point of evaluation by the planning commission. And now the devil's in the details. And taking it chapter by chapter, it's, the set of amendments is parcelized enough that we can individually look at these. And we've attempted to take the big picture view, fully aware that the minute details are really what fleshes this out, so.
Can you flip back to the comprehensive plan policies? I know we're going to be looking at them in more detail. Obviously, we've
Yeah,
got
okay,
just
I'll
a
start with
portion
this
of them.
one.
But I think, as a citizen pointed out, there's going to be some balancing here. So I think, as you're saying, policy 2.5.3, design standards. So that deals with Oregon City's sense of place, its identity, while protecting, and not so much protecting, but I'd say maintaining neighborhoods. And so I don't know what the ... is, but
It's called an ellipse.
yes, I think as a way to
And on
way to
the,
help that is to look at those, to look at how things are going to be designed and developed. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having something that's a little different, but how do we,
Do you need to look at the design centers?
well, it
specifically?
says review design standards to ensure compatibility with existing neighborhoods. So any of these housing types are gonna have to come into somebody's neighborhood, and how are they gonna fit? How are they going to be
But I mean,
compatible?
would you be focusing on the design standards or the systems that make sure that we have checks and balances? So that the community members are reviewing those standards? Does that make sense?
Somewhat, yes.
Yeah.
Did you get that?
I think when we write any of this code, we want to make sure we have very clear standards so that they're not discretionary.
Well, and the other part of it, I mean, well, I guess maybe the
There is some
clear and objective
discretion.
goes away when you do this, but the other part of it is landscaping and, God forbid, tree protection. And the ability to have some flexibility to move a house around or a garage around or a driveway around so that you do protect a nice tree that might be on the site. I don't know if that can fit into the clear and objective realm that we're discussing, but I think there's an important place for, as a concession for the change in all the design standards that we're having.
Well, and I had a discussion with Laura and Pete when I went in, and I'll just throw it out there, this probably isn't necessarily the biggest or the proper venue, but I don't think residential planter strips are relevant. I would rather see people have 5 more feet in their front yard and plant a big elm or an oak or a maple than to have these little tiny trees that never get too big and frankly mask the different types of houses because they're literally blocking the view of the house. And when you pull up next to your house in front of it and you get out and step in the mud because it's dirt instead of a sidewalk, I just think we would win more. I mean, I have no problem with them in a commercial zone to have the trees and all that. But, in a residential area, I think planter strips are just a pain in the butt.
If they're
People
wide
don't
enough,
take,
they're okay,
they don't
but-
take control of them.
Yeah.
They let the grass grow until it's too long. The trees break because,
my neighborhood.
and, people replace them, like, just going down 15th. I've got rose bushes, I've got decorative bark mulches, I've got every other tree because the ones are broken. And yet, in the yards, I have huge magnolias and pine trees that stretch out over the road and maples that do everything that Eastmoreland is doing, mixed in with street trees, which can only grow so high because they're hitting the canopy of the elm. well, actually Maple, so, it just, I question the need for a planter strip in residential neighborhoods, especially when they plant the right trees and they heave the sidewalk up. It's clear when it's their oak tree and the sidewalk's heaved that it's their problem. Their argument, if I planted the right tree and now the sidewalk's heaved, why is it my problem? I did what I was told by the city.
Well, the homeowner didn't do it, the developer did.
Well, but it was in the code. So I think I think we need at some point to have a bigger discussion about the planter strips and street trees. I like the idea of us requiring them to put trees in their yard. And maybe we say, you get the 5 feet back in your yard, but we're gonna regulate the first 8 feet for what kind of tree you put in so they can put a bigger tree or a tree that will become bigger. But I mean, why not an apple tree? Why not, some people have them. So anyway, that's my thing about, if we're gonna look at design standards and compatibility, the thing that makes a neighborhood different isn't 37 5-foot-high birches. It's an apple tree and a pear tree and a maple and an elm and somebody with a tire swing in their yard and,
Well, up where you live, I wouldn't say it's a traditional platted area because there's a lot of places where you are in Ely that, in Buena Vista, that do not have curbs and sidewalks. I think in the area where I live in, where it was traditionally platted that way, I think it adds a lot of value to the street. And
that's why I wanna have that discussion because there are those different perspectives.
Kenema, it doesn't have
They don't have
curbs
5
and
feet.
sidewalks, and there's not 5 feet anywhere.
There's street trees I picked up from you, and it's kind of a topic that I've looked at a little bit in different areas, and they cause some problems, just like Damon said, if they're the wrong tree, there goes the sidewalks, and it's the homeowner's responsibility to take care of it, homeowner's responsibility for trimming it to some spec on the sidewalk side and a different spec on the street side for the garbage trucks coming by and picking up your garbage can.
Or buses or whatever.
So, and where I'm taller than average, if I go for a walk in the neighborhood, I'm usually ducking under limbs on the
Well,
sidewalk.
that's where you carry your little handsaw and you just do a little selective pruning on your way in your walk.
I think
Yeah.
you guys bring up an interesting discussion, which is what are we doing? What's the purpose of the project? What are we doing? And how do we know what's reserved for larger discussions later and what's included with this project as well? Which will be an interesting thing for you to work through as a commission when we go through this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily part of this, but I think it's part of the discussion about livability and design standards and, different appearances to neighborhoods, not too far away from
Yes.
it. I know it's gonna
Yes,
yell at
And-
me.
yes, he is gonna yell at you.
The one thing that I would add regarding livability and sort of our order of operations of how we got here was, comp plan runs everything, and then the city commission goals came out of the comp plan. But that really in this package, we're looking at neighborhood livability in a couple different ways. We're looking at structure and structure compatibility, that kind of stuff through the design standards, but we're also looking at neighborhood livability as a way of looking at the people who live in the neighborhood and the ability for them to stay and living in those neighborhoods that they love and not getting either priced out or having these mid options for them as being really part of the neighborhood livability. So we're looking at both sort of the social aspects of it and the ability for grandma to stay close if she needs to, or as well as the design. So we're you'll see in the staff report, looking at it from a couple different lenses.
As a few words against getting into the street trees and all of that, I think there's some
It's
code already there that gives you options to get rid of the street trees and plant some trees there. So it's not the main topic that we should be looking at, I don't think, to get this code, the revised code that's
Well, it's a
coming out.
bigger issue in terms of I think trees add value to a neighborhood, so it gets, in my opinion, I'm not gonna talk about whether I think there should be a planter strip or not, but that it's a livability issue. And with so much asphalt and sidewalk cement, we need some green to try to balance that, and that's, that would be where I would be going. I mean, it would be nice if we could just use more, pervious pavers instead of, having asphalt. So, I mean, as you all know, when the weather gets hot, guess what's the hottest? That asphalt is, contributing to the downfall of our environment.
Yeah. And even when you're creating flag lots, there's plenty of opportunities for buffers and planting strips along the access,
Yeah.
which the current flag lot code is devoid of
Doesn't have
for
anything.
Oregon City. So I've got a whole bunch of suggestions on that too.
So we've got neighborhood livability, as I have a firm belief that people who want to come to develop in Oregon City need to fit our model, not the reverse. We're not fitting their model.
Right.
They need to fit in with what we as a community feel is important. And I think that there's a lot of tug going on with that issue. And I don't know I don't want to make a code that says that, but it should be implied, development for development's sake is not good for anybody. But development that fits into a community, fits into a neighborhood, fits into this particular street, that's the kind of thing that I think that we as a community want, and not the reverse. And I know some of it can be subjective, because, as I said, driving through Sellwood, I'm thinking, wow, why did they put that there? Or I'd say, gee, that looks really great, it fits in. I was thinking of some of those new developments that are down in the First Edition in Lake Oswego, and I thought, I know it's new, but it could have been there all the time. So there's that whole balance. So policy, the next goal,
Okay.
just, yes, I will, if you get them to me, I will read it.
All right, goal 10.1, diverse housing opportunities. And I think more than anything, this section of goals and policies speaks to the project. They all seem to be right in line with what the equitable housing project is all
10.2
about.
say, 10.1.2 say.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of these are really lofty and notable, but we have no way without incentives to implement
Yeah.
some of these
And
things.
again, I want to look at all the goals and policies, or some of the goals and policies that aren't there, or that aren't in the comp plan.
Yeah.
And they probably should be added. I mean, there should, even if we don't do it this time, we should add incentives. We should add, rent breaks for a certain percentage of multifamily housing in exchange for a tax break for a property owner. We should be having all those other kinds of tools in the alternative housing rubric, other than just the design standards. And I think that's where we're talking about what the comprehensive plan how the comprehensive plan needs to be addressed. We need to look at what goals and policies need to be included to empower us to be able to have those other kinds of things, other kinds of tools in the box.
What incentives are on the table?
None that I know of.
SDCs.
Well, that's not an
Within the
incentive.
scope of this project, it is very limited.
Right.
I'm going to be
We
really
understand
clear
that.
about that.
We understand that.
So incentives that you want to put specifically as a recommendation for another project?
Right, I think we want to set the table I think we have an
Yeah.
opportunity to set the table for that.
Right.
By amending the comp plan to add the specific goals that would enable us to do that when the opportunity arose, to add those other pieces to this project.
Yeah. I don't have a slide of that.
That's
so
fine. That's fine.
I do have a slide from a prior meeting that deals with that issue. Verbally, I can run through some of them.
Go ahead.
This project does not include adjustments to SDCs. It does not include restrictions on rent.
Right.
How would we even do that? I don't know.
It doesn't include the physical construction or identification of a specific site for the construction of affordable units, you know. We haven't dealt in the code with what are called SROs, or single room occupancies, where everyone's sharing a central cooking
Right.
and bathroom.
Co-housing.
Yeah.
Well, not quite.
And those are some of the biggies. What are some of the others? Yeah.
So the incentives in this round of code, there's really just a couple. One is for 3 and 4 plexes to make it a quicker, easier review process. That is an incentive. So
Yeah.
rather than pay somewhere between, I don't know, more than $5,000 to go through a review process with a lot of more uncertainty, provide more clear and objective standards, and do it in a shorter amount of time. So that's one incentive. The other incentive, there's 3. There's one where we have to, in accordance with some legal changes, you have to process certain affordable housing projects quicker. And then the third one is relates to multifamily, and there is an incentive for a density bonus to allow up to 20% density increase in the high density residential, which is just R2 zoning designation. So really, there's 3 actual incentives, because we're just, because we're just looking at the menu option. The other incentives would be that you have a bigger toolbox to choose from for property owners.
Laura, I just want to be really honest.
You get more choices. Choice
I'm
is
having
the
a difficult
incentive.
time with the 4-plex. What does the word multiple mean?
So current code, multi-housing is defined as 3 or more units on one parcel. And the idea was that 3 to 4 plex should be called out as a separate type of unit to allow an expedited review with design standards for somebody with a smaller piece of land that just wanted to do a 3 to 4 plex without having to go through the full multifamily design standards process that we currently have. And it could be, basically it's an attached product where everything is on one parcel. It's very similar in look to a townhome, but it's not a townhome. It's 3 or more units on one parcel. Townhome is a row house, which is typically on a fee simple lot, which has a party wall with another lot and another townhome.
I'm just trying to look up the definition of what multiple means, because
Yeah.
3 to me is not a single family dwelling. 4 to me is not a single family dwelling.
Right.
4 is 4 things. That's not, that, I'm trying, I don't
We struggle with the
understand.
name.
Yes,
Yeah.
I don't understand the staff's rationale to do this and to do something expedited, because again, I hate to say it, but I'm always looking at what the unintended consequences are. That's how I have to rationalize it, because it's not just this, it's what's over here. What is happening over here that's not the right thing? So how is a,
We should look at the multiplex design standards.
yeah, I mean, I understand what a duplex is. I understand how those fit in. I don't understand how a 3 and a 4-plex fits in.
And so just to clarify too, I think the real thing is like we treat single family and duplexes differently than everything else. Is there a space where you can treat 3 and 4 plexes with their own set of design standards, clear and objective, in a clear way so all neighbors know? One thing I would just say about the 3 and the 4 plexes is that they're not allowed in the low density residential zoning designations. They're the medium density residential zoning designations, and you probably talked about this last time I was here. The big shift is not looking at embracing our comprehensive plan, and one of the ways that we do that is by separating the housing types by comp plan designation. So we look at as a bundle, low density residential together, medium density residential together, and really embrace some of those designations in the comp plan.
Well, and this isn't my purview, but I believe that there's different ownership requirements for when either buying or getting into that. But perhaps we can ask our, it's a work session, so ask our real estate broker friend.
And he is a friend. He is a friend.
You guys have the purview of all the code and such. We actually had the discussion about the word multifamily in equitable housing. We came up with, I think it was multiple,
We were gonna call it a multiplex.
multiplex.
Well, that's what I hear more
Never said
often.
not to.
Per
That's what I think of
definition,
it
in
as
a Fannie
fear.
and Freddie loan, a conventional loan, you can purchase up to 4 units
Right.
as a government-backed loan, the Fannie or Freddie. After that, that becomes non-government, it's not Fannie and Freddie. So the difference is, as a public looking at this definition, the 3-4plex, people kind of know, hey, I'm a person, a small-time investor that can purchase a piece of dirt and go vertical with that type of product. Does that make sense? So,
Well, I guess I just don't know why 3 and 4 plexes are called out and what makes them different than multifamily housing and or a townhome. I mean, I look at that 4-plex in that picture and it's a townhome. It's bigger than the ones I'm used to, but it's just a bigger townhome.
and going back to what Pete says, it's all structure of how it's owned in the land. And so when us as realtors are looking at a project, so you've got a duplex that is right there. It's
Right.
2 on 1 lot, or attached houses, a townhome. The 3-4plex, again, goes to how many units are on 1 lot. And as the public, people,
I know where there's 5 townhomes on 1 lot.
correct, and
So
then
what's the difference between that and a 5-plex?
the difference is the difference in lending.
It's how it is as an asset in the inventory.
It's a building
Yeah.
divided into 3 self-contained units.
Yeah. So in the current code, I believe it is 3 or more units is a multifamily.
Family.
I do know in the R2 zoning, I did have a project that a client of mine was looking to put 2 duplexes on 1 lot because we had the square footage,
Right.
but we didn't have that 3 or more continuous. So opening that, I don't remember what the code was gonna change to, but opening that where we could put 4 units on there could be a conventional financing, and this is actually was gonna be kind of a low income project. He was shooting for $1,000 a month rent for an 800 square foot duplex. It was gonna be 2 duplexes on 1 lot.
Well, it's still, why isn't it just under multifamily housing? And, I'm gonna do multifamily housing for a 4-family unit or 4 DUs. Why does it need to have its own code rather than just be, I'm only gonna have a 4 DU unit or a 27 DU unit? I mean, what is different in our code between a 4-plex and a 27-plex?
In the proposed code, it's the design standards and process for review, which would
Exactly.
mean
And
a
what's
different
different?
fee. Would you, we can, Pete was just about to start the multifamily design stuff. We can,
But I want to know,
Multiple family says 3 or more attached units on 1 lot.
so a lot of the multifamily, so a lot of the design standards for multifamily and commercial uses, because they're kind of bundled into one in this newer package, are for larger buildings. For example, for buildings more than 120 feet long, you have to big variations and setbacks, things like that. So some of the 3 and 4-plex are more tailored to the size of a 3 and 4-plex unit.
but they're not going to be 120 feet long, so they're not going to have to deal with the,
Right, so it removes some of those unnecessary standards. It's more tailored to just that specific product type. And with that, they are clear and objective, which is a little bit different than some of the multifamily standards, which have more of that discretion in them.
Yeah, I think you want design standards that are going to be applicable to something rather than when you write findings for, or apply design standards, you want something you can point to as a minimum standard. And if you're trying to apply multifamily design criteria to a very small building, you might not have a lot that's applicable. That's why.
Yeah.
The question is, who's to say it's a small building? I mean,
Well, that's how you define it in the code.
well, I know, but I mean, by its nature, the bulk of, let's use those as an example,
Yeah, sorry.
those are larger in scale and size than most of the buildings we have in any of our existing neighborhoods. So I think you've got a compatibility issue.
There's two things. One is that this is the process to add design standards if we got it wrong or something like that. So
It's
this
not
is
wrong.
perfect. Or, you know what I mean? If you want to add stuff, amend stuff, take it away, this is the venue for that. I had the other one. It was even better. Disregard.
Well, I
It's
just,
okay, we'll come back around.
yeah, I mean, it just, to me, you're creating a whole nother chapter about stuff that you already have things for. And so you check a bunch of NAs when you're reviewing it. And if you want to expand 3 and 4 plexes into medium, then you just say, medium density housing will allow no more than 4 units in a multifamily thing. And then you've got it in the medium, and you've still got the same checklist, and, you know, there you go.
I think so 5 and more is not permitted in the medium density
Right.
residential zoning designation. So we wanted to have that compatibility piece,
fits
so
in
it
that
is very
specification.
different.
Yeah.
But see,
And
in
then,
the past, in the R3.5 or RC4, anything larger than a duplex was not permitted either, because there was a compatibility issue.
yeah, so that's where the design standards come into play. And then the other thing is that we understand that it is challenging for people that just want to know, what can I do? And when they read a code and half of it is not applicable, that is a barrier that we've become aware of through this process, is that if you want, I think it's a barrier for the applicant, but more, I think it's a barrier for residents, is to know what can be built next door. If we had this clear package to say, you can, here's your menu and here's what each of those menu item standards are, I think it's better for the public.
I guess what I would suggest is, with your checklist of design standards, is have it, you know, these apply for 3 or more, these apply for 5 or more. And so, you know, it's still considered multifamily housing. It's, you know, 4 units are allowed, up to 4 units are allowed in a medium, but it doesn't get called out as a whole separate housing type, because,
It isn't.
yeah, because when I look at it, it's a row of townhouses, it's a row of, you know, apartments. I don't know what it is, but it isn't a single-family residence, and, or even a duplex, clearly, because there's 4 garages. So I have trouble with it being pulled out when there's simple reformatting solutions to it.
No, because I think if you do the simple reformatting, you lose all those design standards that we want to have tailor-made for that particular use in that particular zone. So that zone will define and have specific design standards for that 3-plex or 4-plex or whatever it is you're going to do. And I don't think that they're the same as the standards that you would apply to a multifamily residence or a larger apartment. I think that there are things that happen on a smaller type of use than a larger scale multifamily.
I agree. I think it has the potential for neighborhood compatibility in a 3 or 4
You have
plex.
more opportunity to make that compatible rather than just applying a one-size-fits-all set of design standards that would apply to a 34-unit complex as opposed to a 3-unit complex.
Well, I guess part of the question and again, I'm drilling down a little farther, where would these be appropriate? And I'm having a really hard time trying to figure out where a fourplex would be appropriate.
That's a harder question.
And that,
Close to transit lines,
Well,
closer to major arterials, closer to.
I
In
understand
the
that,
concept plan areas.
Yeah.
I
Or on top of
understand
us,
that,
yeah.
but there
We know
are,
the nature.
Yeah, I was gonna go to the map, but it's all the way back there.
well, maybe we can move
Have
it
a seat,
closer.
relax.
I mean,
So it's
Let
a
me-
good question.
let me just finish my thought.
Oh,
So
okay.
I am looking at areas of the community that already have design standards, and I don't see any of those fitting in those areas because they wouldn't meet the design standards that are more specific than what the staff is proposing. So I'm trying to think, okay, do we want to put one in Hazel Grove, Westling Farms? I don't know.
And I haven't looked at the design.
Yeah, I mean, so the 3 and 4plexes are only in the medium density residential, which is R3, 5, and R5. The city has no zoned R5 properties at this time.
Can they
but
be in R2s?
What's that?
They can be in R2s also.
Yeah, they can be in R2s multifamily.
Just-
That's
So
correct,
are we
thank
going
you.
to put them in Country Village Mobile Home Park because that's R 3.5? Are we going to put them in the McLaughlin Conservation District? Part of it is R 3.5. I would have to say no, no, and no.
I know Denise and I have had this conversation even on the project too, is because there are only certain areas, as it's been stated, of 3, 5, and 2. The best, and the only reason why
You gotta
That's
talk
okay.
really loud.
That's okay.
Alright.
Just, we're in a work session, just go up there because you're not going to be able to explain it and we don't have the handheld mic.
yeah.
There's a Mike's here though, that'll work.
I'll catch it.
So he is
So just
pointing
for-
to the zoning map.
Mapping purposes, the R35 is the light brown.
Light brown.
Yeah, and
And then what's on 2?
there's no R5.
R5 is in the concept plan areas.
Yeah. I'll just say.
Thank you for pointing that out though.
I got it, I'll sit down.
You can bring it out.
That's all right.
So, Gardner Middle School
Sure.
is areas that has R2 right now.
Around Gardner?
Yeah, and so if you look at Gardner Middle School, you look at the neighborhood that sits in that
Pete, why don't you
neighborhood,
point
look
to
at the
that?
houses. There's lots of older homes that necessarily are to
Great
current
housing
standards
stock.
right now that
Yep.
may need to be either rehabbed or removed. There are a mix of duplexes in there. There's a senior living rehab facility in there. So the actual multifamily would fit in that neighborhood because it's got some of that aspect already in that neighborhood since the 70s. The R35, on the other hand, yeah, it fits in some areas. I live up on by St. John's Cemetery, and my house, I own a duplex, and to have 4, let's say, 4 units in a row in our neighborhood would probably fit, because we've already got the duplexes there. We've already got a manufactured home, and so there are areas that can handle it. Now, McLaughlin District, handle it. That would fit. McLaughlin District, I'd have to agree with Denise. There might not be the greatest idea, that area.
Right.
So the question I've had, and I think I brought it up, is it an ability to target some of these design standards for specific areas, kind of like what design standards are in the historic district? That makes sense.
Again, it's preaching to the choir. That is not part of this project, but I think if we had a needs analysis, we could do a little overlay this is where they could go. I mean, that's part of my concern about it, is that where would it fit? It shouldn't just be a blanket, everything everywhere, because everything everywhere doesn't fit. And why lead someone on to say everything is allowed everywhere when it doesn't always work without doing something else?
And can I just have Carrie, our assistant city attorney, just do a couple sentences about how it relates to historic districts, just for the viewing audience, if that's okay?
Sure.
I'm not
Well,
I'm not really fond of the Portland model, so please don't say that. because that's not working.
Just let her.
Yes,
Well,
go ahead.
the way the code is drafted right now, historic districts and conservation districts still have to go through design review. So if I propose a fourplex in McLaughlin and it can't be made compatible, then I won't get approval. So that's how it works in design, it works in historic districts. Design review still applies for historic districts, conservation districts. So that is 2 cents about that. The reason why we can't make everything an overlay is because we've got to have this obligation of clear and objective standards. And so, and, you know, I mean, we're trying to balance this question of customization and clear and objective and efficiency. And if we haven't struck the right balance, then we haven't struck the right balance, but that's what we're trying to do. And,
And I agree with your first sentence, but I just want to make sure that we have a strict enough test, you know, in terms of design review compatibility and clear and objective standards, because I think that we have some trouble, like in the Kenema district and other places where, you know, HRAB is approving things that they perceive meet the criteria, but many others don't feel like they do. And so
But
I
that's-
want to make sure that we,
that's subject to historic design guidelines.
Right.
It doesn't have anything to do with what's in the code right here. And I mean, that's a question
Yeah.
of the guidelines, whether the guidelines are clear enough. I mean, they were written a long time ago.
Yeah.
So we have a very different sort of,
good. I mean, that's good because
but that isn't, again, beyond the scope of what we're trying to do here. Historic districts and the treatment of historic districts will not be any different as a result of these code
That's
amendments.
right, yeah, but I mean, I'm just using that, maybe it's apples and oranges, but I was just using that as an example of a weak standard versus something that we can develop here and have the opportunity to develop as good standards and things that are gonna work well.
I'd rather have somebody know that they can develop it in X place rather than have somebody go through a process and get it turned down because it didn't meet the standards in that particular historic district. I mean, to me,
Or
that's
just
a,
neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it's all about compatible with the neighborhood, no
Yeah.
matter what the district is.
right.
Can I make a comment? Thank you. Thank you. Paul Edgar again. One of the issues still is affordability. We start talking about all of these things and we talk about a fourplex or a multiplex or this or that. And all of a sudden we're at $250 a unit again. And somewhere along the line, when I'm dealing with homeless people or I'm on a board and I'm giving out money to people to pay rent, so I don't force those same people out onto the street, because once they're out the street, no holds barred again. And so the whole idea is that there are all of these levels. There's from the shelter level, and if we try to create shelters and then we vet people in the shelters and then we move them out of the shelters into maybe the next level. And it's not pretty, but we move them along. And so there are all of these levels. And what we're really talking about is this gross need for the lowest possible cost housing, not $250, not $100,000 a unit. And we're not talking about having a whole lot of government subsidies and plans and stuff. We have to start also looking at how we're going to put some really affordable, I have grandchildren in college, and I see, my granddaughter said, hey, I just upgraded my unit. She's a senior, and she's her last year, and she finally got into something that is livable, not a closet. Well, let's, in the sense of coming back and saying, you guys are, I seem like I hear all of this stuff talking about everybody making a ton of money. The realtor, everybody up here at this high level. And my focus has been trying to keep people off the street. And how do we get something down there where we can where we can start moving people to productive lives and doing it with some degree of Paul, I agree with you, and Denise, I want trees and I want something around there where I breathe fresh air. When I go into Kenema to my house, the temperature goes down 10 degrees. I can breathe fresh air, and I'm in Portland, on my property there, and I look at the stuff and I come back here and my nerves level, my tension drops.
It's a big part of it, yeah.
She's too tight.
That's part of the reason why, we're living here in Oregon City, and I kind of like what Denise says. I don't, what they want to do over there, fine. But let's also look at how can we create something truly, truly affordable. Maybe something that you would never consider living in, but maybe you lived in something worse than that when you're trying to go to college.
Well,
But we just gotta, right now, we're talking too high.
well, part of it is that in order for people to get into housing, we can't be tearing down the smaller houses, the starter houses. And that's it's not happening here, but it's happening elsewhere.
Yes. And this is the reason why I think we need to do some really searching for how to go out into some of these other lands and do something that's more dense, more housing units, more in a clustered home development for doing some of this out there separated, because I know not in my backyard is real. You can propose anything. I've been fighting some of the stuff that's been proposed in my backyard because I think I'm a historic district, but it degrades it. It's not consistent with a historic district. And anyway, please start, because we can't satisfy all of this, and somewhere along the line, we've got to get this thing down to where idealistically we could have a housing unit that costs $50,000 or less.
I'm looking at policy.
Or as an example, if you could take your 250, 300, because you'll get some of that with this new code, or get the possibility to develop something at that size. If you shave $50,000 off from a livable unit, there will be a supply of renters coming in or buyers coming in that can afford that, but they cannot continue to afford the 500,000 and up houses. So we can't have a solution for everybody, but if we can drive that price down, I agree with you. There is the extremely low end that you've talked about, and I've heard you talk that for a long time, and I support that. But I think this is kind of targeted at the missing middle, and I don't think the low end is part of the missing middle. It's lower yet.
But Johnson City is an example, and I spent some significant time studying that housing model that they create over their own city. But those are on those are manufactured homes on these little lots. They waste a lot of space in the roads, which I don't agree with, because I think we could be doing more with grass and trees and livability. But when you look at what they were able to achieve and the cost of those units, and the lot rent is cheap, and they're making money, so there's an economic model that's win-win with the Johnson City methodology that they're doing. But they're packing a lot of people in, and I think we could be doing something, and it may be R1 lot size, okay? And it'll look at the housing, the townhouses on South End Road, right across at Warner Parrott, right along that strip, right through there. They don't look that bad.
No, they're great.
And they're, you know, they're right across from a convenience or schools and everything.
I'm what is known as a YIMBY about that project.
Okay.
I say yes in my backyard. It was much better than what it was before, which was an old ramshackle house. And unfortunately, they've gone up sky high. They started at about $160,000. Great little houses, great little, I mean, it was kind of compact and it was a little bit gramo-jammo, but all in all, I thought it was a good project. Yeah, I learned that from
I know, I said
the
that.
greatest.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was a good project. I liked it.
Yeah, and this is to me the middle.
It was economies of scale, I need to.
Yeah.
What they,
Right.
that particular project is more addressing the middle ground. But boy, when you're looking at this stuff, there's that middle ground and there's the next level down there, but then there's multiple layers down below. And as we start to try to work our way through all of this, we have to create a mix.
Yeah, well, and it's going to be, I mean, truth be told, it's going to be aspirational until we get at all of the systemic issues that are driving housing up, like lumber, like materials, like taxes, tariffs.
But it's also not as simple as you build cheap housing, because people live where they want to live, and those people will drive housing costs up, and so we need a mix. And so even if we have housing that is going to be expensive housing, those people are going to be leaving homes that will then be available.
Hopefully.
And ideally.
Yeah, I think that this is, first thing is getting them into housing and getting them a job and giving them a future where they can see their way and do it. But between that and that ever-loving, beautiful thing called transportation, where like on South End Road, it sucks. I know. And how do you go out there? You don't have mass transit out there, and you don't have hardly anything out there. And I remember the plan when they said we're going to put a turn lane in the middle of South End Road where it's breaking off. We know we can't do that, but that's in the comp plan. Okay, fairy tale land.
Yeah.
Okay, and so we've got to think sometimes in reality mode.
Is the commission okay if we get a little bit of your feedback on our multifamily commercial design standards before we adjourn?
I know we're sort of there, but I'm still looking at the comp plan policies, and again, I don't think it's been adequately explained how we got there. So we, you know.
Why the
we're-
project was the city
What I
commission goal?
explained earlier. It starts here, not down there. And we're talking about, you know, so 10.24, why does it say near public, you know, current and future public transportation routes? Because we're hoping to get some more transportation routes. We don't know exactly where they are. We can't quite convince TriMet to go out to South End Road because again, they don't want to provide service if there's nobody out there and nobody can use the service if it's not there, and we keep going around in this big giant circle, but we know that that's an area where transportation is needed. We can't quite get there. The next one, 11.16 is talking about, read the last part, to infill vacant land. So it's talking about efficient use of existing public facilities and service, but a lot of vacant land that we have has no facilities and services. We've got an area that's zoned R2 that we can't serve, and it's in the middle of our town, but there's no capacity. A lot of our infrastructure in Oregon City, except for in the newer areas, is at capacity because it's old. And I know that because the work they're doing on High Street, they dug up some old ductile iron and wooden pipes. You know, it still exists.
Well, we'll have input from certainly our Public Works Department, and you'll see some memos regarding the capacity issue with the proposed project amendments.
So it's really, it's to me, this is all aimed as just a new, it's a new dress. We're talking about workforce housing. So the person that's the pharmacist assistant, the person that's the cook at Mike's Drive-In, the person that works at Oregon City Garbage, can we look at how those people can afford to be in housing? That's what workforce housing is. It's the one in the middle. You're making money, but you can't afford to live where you need to be. Or maybe they don't want to be near their work. It's not, everybody wants to do that.
Well, to me, it's a simple solution to this whole affordable housing and the skyrocketing costs and all that. We just need to make Oregon City a place no one wants to be.
I knew.
And then,
Thanks, David.
and then the housing will drop because people want to, sell and, it'll just solve itself and we'll only be at like 20,000 in 2050.
So can we go through a couple of those
Yes.
design standards?
Well, everybody's laughing. I mean, it's
Yeah.
I
Go for it,
I
Pete.
bought my house during the major economic downturn in Oregon City.
I was close to that, but
You were close.
We did the opposite.
I paid 7% mortgage.
Yep. Tell me about it.
It's crazy.
We had 10. And we had to refi.
Yeah, we did that.
Okay, so the proposal with multifamily is that the definition of multifamily would change to 5 or more units on one parcel. So it's only going to be permitted in the R2 zone, but it will also be permitted in the mixed-use zones as it is currently. So code packet, page 267, that's where the design standards are. And what we're proposing is that we had very similar standards for certain architectural standards, what we call modulation and articulation standards. So the big change here is to combine multifamily design standards with commercial design standards for buildings that are over 120 feet long. And so there's some options and flexibility there. The roof, starting on 267. One of the roof line standards being vastly simplified. Basically, if you have a roof line that's 75 feet long or more, you have to break it up with either a cross gable or some other element of a significant size. We haven't defined what is significant there, so we need some input on that. Does it mean a parapet wall that is at least 2 feet high or some percentage of the wall itself? That was the way the code was written previously. But that's
I'm not where you are.
okay.
69?
283 is,
I'm on 269.
283 is the start of the institutional office, multifamily, retail, and commercial building standards.
Yeah. I just cited the beginning of the chapter.
Okay. 283.
Yeah.
I was on 260.
That's the beginning,
So principally, building orientation, all buildings along the street will have to have the front most architecturally significant facade oriented towards the street and a functional primary entrance. Entranceway requirements are a lot clearer. You have to include a doorway and a minimum of at least 4 of the following elements. And it's listed.
Which section?
Section 5,
bottom of page 284.
bottom of page 284.
Okay. I'm with you.
The things that are redlined there are in a section that's coming up, so we'll get to that. The corner lot requirement for having 2 entrances or chamfering the building when you're a corner lot, proposal is not to apply that requirement to multifamily buildings.
What do you mean by chamfering the corner? I know what a chamfer
Like cutting the
post is.
corner at 45-degree angle and a minimum of 10 feet from the corner.
Putting in an angled door.
Yeah, so they would have to meet other entrance requirements, but not those. That's, then top of page 286, variation in massing. So every 120 feet in width, a modulation would be required at least 10 feet deep and 30 feet wide, extending through all floors. Decks and roof overhangs could encroach up to 3 feet per side into the modulation. In addition to that, you will also have to have projections or recesses of at least 1 foot for a minimum width of 2 feet at intervals of 30 feet or less.
What do we consider a deck?
A deck,
I mean, I've seen them where they're probably 2 feet wide and you couldn't,
Yeah.
somebody couldn't use it.
yeah.
You just open your window and there's this little ledge. And I've seen them where they're,
Whole nother buildings.
well, they're
They're wraparounds.
a usable deck where you could put your little hibachi or a chair or,
We talked about that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know we did.
Usable
Yeah,
deck.
what do we do?
Do you want to,
Either meets our code, we talked about it in terms of open space.
Usable open
And we changed
space.
our open
Yes.
space to usable
Yeah.
open space, so
the usable open space standard is on page 290, and it could include decks, but it does not
I think the smallest usable
specify.
deck I've seen is, think about a deck on a cruise ship. That's a
Right.
usable sized deck. I mean, without it being gigantic, but you can get 2 chairs out there and hang out.
I thought there was talk about square footage minimum or maximum.
Did we talk about that?
So I wanted to highlight, Pete's talking about the difference in variation massing. So this section mimics a lot of our multifamily variation massing, where it's like you got this building, it's 120 feet long, then you have this break, and the break extends 30 feet. So that all is the same that was in multifamily. The depth of the massing is reduced from 20 feet deep to 10 feet deep, so that is different. And so some of these variation massing, you move some not very clear and objective multifamily, but also more variation massing to a little bit less variation massing for the big variations. And then lots more little tiny, so little tiny bumps in and out, and the big bumps in and out for a building matches what used to be in multifamily, except for it's not as deep as what used to be required in multifamily. So one of the biggest thing that changed is this variation massing portion of the proposed code. So it's just different, but it is mainly reflective of what multifamily used to be.
It would help us, what could that look like?
So it would look like a big building, every part that's, if it goes beyond 120
I mean,
feet,
in reality, I mean,
the minimum is,
a drawing, what would that possibly look like?
so it's,
Because I don't think the one you're showing up there meets that.
the minimum standard is a big wall. Think of a big, relatively flat, but not flat. We'll talk about the little minors in a minute. But every big section will then have a depth that's recessed 10 feet for 30 feet long. And then it comes back up again, and then you'll have a section of wall at the worst case scenario. And then that big long section also has some projections or recesses. They're just small. They're at least every 30 feet, but they're small. They're, a foot depth and 2
So it
feet
could be
wide.
Projected
like columns.
windows.
So as a part of this, I would suggest that there will be drawings as examples for the different types of articulations that the building should have.
Because otherwise you're guessing,
Well, and you've also got
Subjective.
ambiguity too.
subjective.
Yeah.
You got architect A saying, well, I think it looks like this, and architect B going, it looks like that.
And what's the difference between
Good.
32 feet and 31 feet? Why does it matter?
Yeah, we like the pictures.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we had a good discussion on what the difference was
Yeah.
between variation massing.
Pictures work.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of worst case, which is some of those apartment buildings in Portland where their variation is cement, glass. And I know that's not what you're talking about. I'm just saying, that's the evil worst case. And you're, and
My wife's called me that before.
I'll take it. So, you know, and those bumps, the 10-foot indent, for lack of a better term, could those then be filled by a deck?
No, that's why the design
yeah,
guidelines
they
for
could.
the conservation district.
Decks and roof overhangs may encroach up to 3 feet per side into the modulation.
So they can only be 3 feet, you can only have 3 feet of deck. into that modulation.
Yes.
So it
Unless
couldn't,
they have a design background.
yeah, because I'm just thinking, if it's an apartment, that'd be really nice if it's 10 feet, that's a nice wide deck. You come out of the master bedroom into the deck, but if it's only 3 feet, then it's not,
You'll still have that big visual break in the massing of the building, regardless of decks being there or not.
so it wouldn't change from cement to wood to cement to wood.
There's also that standard too.
Well,
I
I'm just
mean,
saying
to-
that if they replace that 10 feet with a deck, then you'd have a cement wood, but it'd still be flat. Okay.
But see, this year you'd have at least 4 weeks you could be out on your deck because it would be sunny enough. The rest of the time you're
Yeah, that's true.
dealing with wet, nasty weather.
Yep, that's the time to park.
And
In
then,
the wet, nasty weather?
Yeah. Because people don't come over.
can I talk about building details?
Yeah, building details is the next feature. So what we did here was we took many of the features that were common to multifamily design standards and commercial design standards with respect to smaller architectural features, some of which are pretty significant though. So all buildings would have to provide a design on all elevations at the ratio of at least 5 of the following features on this list on the front and street side, and at least 3 on the interior and rear yard, unless in the situation of the interior and rear yard, you have a 0-foot side or rear
Is
setback.
it under number 8, variation in massing,
No, we're looking at the middle of page 286 under
where I am?
9.
It used to be 9H, but it's not, okay, sorry, I thought the cross was through the 9 as well. That's why I said it's number 8.
Yeah. Building-
Okay, sorry, number 9. So you're saying 5 of those?
5 on the streets facing facades or the front, and 3 at minimum on the interior and rear. And spaced at a minimum of 1 feature every 30 linear foot of horizontal wall.
So that's very similar to what was in site plan design review before, but a little bit different with the number of features changing per wall.
Yeah. Are we still talking about modulation? I think 120 feet is too big.
We can go back and talk
Isn't that
about
kinda big?
modulation.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
That's big. That's like
So
the whole R10 lot wide.
what was the length in the old code?
It was 120.
120. Okay.
So that'd be
You're talking
from
about
here
that
to
as
that
being
wall?
a trigger for modulation as opposed to.
Yeah, probably
And-
from this wall to that
That
wall.
wall, that's what I'm thinking.
Or even to the outer wall. Maybe that's enough.
And then there's that little modulation in between. So that's just for the big breaks
I mean,
in
in a large
massing.
city scale, that's good. This is a smaller city. I don't know. Never mind. Anybody else?
And then the list of options has been expanded, so slightly. So you go from dormers to variation in massing, which exceeds the prior section. Then the requirement that these features be varied on different building elevations so that not every building looks the same. At least 2 of the required features on each front and side elevation shall be distinct from those features on other buildings in the same development. Next section we get into is facade transparency, which is incorporating for the ground floor some of the commercial facade transparency requirements. First floor street facing is required to have minimum 60% windows with transparency at least 5 feet in height or below. So we're saying pedestrian level would be measured at 5 feet. First floor of the non-street facing facade, 30%. All other elevations would be 15%, and anything above the first floor.
So that's a new one. Sorry to
That's
hop
new.
in here. Couple new things here. One is now our code says transparency at pedestrian level. And so we wanted to be clearer than that. So we said 5 feet or below. Okay. And then the other part is that the new standard here is to require windows on, it says all floors for all elevations. Right now, there is no standard for commercial buildings to have windows on anything but the first floor. So this adds the 15% transparency, so 15%, think of multifamily design standards, which was 15%. And I'm realizing right now, we should probably, if we want multifamily to still be 15%, we should say that because this is bumping them up to 60 and 30 on the first floor. But this is saying we want more design standard for multifamily and commercial because we want 15% windows measured on a lineal basis for every floor, for every facade. So the question to you is that too much? FYI, it's new. We're adding a standard, we're imposing a new standard because again, we're looking at this balance between all these design stuff and we made some changes, some of the mitigation is.
What does it look like in a
so-
sketch?
Oh, the
That-
15%?
That would help me if I could see.
A lot of multifamily is about 15%
What that would look
actually.
like.
So that if you think of a lot of multifamily where you get, little windows here or there, so like apartment buildings, a lot of those are about 15.
Does that
Depends.
also help more natural light getting into the building for energy consumption?
Yeah,
You
and
know,
I mean,
you're doing it for breaking up the massive wall, but at the same time, you're putting more natural light in.
we are. And they're building it anyway, for the most part today. So there's that, but just know that we're adding a new standard in there and it's applying to all the facades. So is that good to add the new standard? Should it be applied to all facades? Just questions.
So just real quick, the transparency, 5 feet and below, you're losing me on that. I mean, does that mean that I'm 6 feet tall, so I'm gonna walk past a place and not be able to look in because the windows are 5 feet to ground level? Or,
No, they have to be within 5 feet of the ground in order to be considered pedestrian. Pardon?
Do we have anything that we can see as an illustration or an actual,
No, there are no drawings associated
what
with
does
this.
that look like? Do
So-
we have
So I
anything
can
in
tell you what
Oregon
it
City of
doesn't
what
look
that
like.
looks like?
So here's what, over the years, so the code is funny, right? Because we amended it in 2004 to have all these new design standards and then, so
and then 15 years have gone by, so.
it's 15 years. Yeah, so transparency wasn't a thing before, and then we added it into our code, and we said, when we added it, we said you need to have X% of transparency at pedestrian level. And that was
Yeah.
what the word was, at pedestrian
wasn't
level.
defined.
We ended up going to Luba a little bit over some of that finding, and we prevailed, but what we wanted to do was be very clear about what our expectations are for windows. What we don't want, and what we often saw people wanting to do, is to just have a lot of little, very high slit windows, the clear story windows where if the purpose of having windows is to be able to engage with the street and avoid these flat, uninteresting walls and break them up into human scale and have some engagement there, that the windows were in a place that you could interact with. So this is clarifying the windows have to be 5 feet or below. That being said, you might want to say they're at least 2 feet off the ground or something if you want,
Right.
because they could be on the ground. But we really want to be clear about where windows need to be in order to meet this 30%,
Yeah, I
60% transparency on the first floor.
Because, if you say 5 feet down, then, that's great for kids. But for Vern and I, it means we get to look at a flat wall.
But they're normally not that. They're like, there is some height to them.
I understand, but I think
So,
You
or below
know,
needs.
we have seen that there is someone who will build to the standard and not a penny over that. And, you know, and then push desks up against the window so that the bottom 3 feet are even occluded, but the window's there.
Right.
And, you know, it might be bad business practice, but, you know, there's bad businessmen as well as there's good ones. So, you know, to me, I think that if you're gonna put any sort of height in there and say, yeah, it'd be pedestrian level, that it should say, you know, between 3 and 8 feet or something like that, or 2 and 7, or, so if there's 5 foot of window,
So yeah, what we're getting is people pushing up to the sky as much as possible. So people wanted to put it at 6 feet high or 8 feet high would be the bottom of the window.
right?
And we're like,
And that's what I'm saying, you know,
that's not helpful.
3 to 8, or, you know, or 2 to 7 gets it up off the ground. And, you know, kids can still look in and be engaged, but
We could say the bottom of the window could be 3 to 5 feet off the ground.
no,
Is
I
that-
don't want the bottom of the window. I mean,
You want adequate size of window within a range of height.
yeah, I mean, because, well, I guess I need to clarify. Are you saying that the bottom of the window has to be 5 feet? So nobody, all the 410s in the world don't get to see anything? And I know a lot of 410s.
It's just picking the number for what's
Okay.
pedestrian height.
I
We've implemented
say-
it as 5 feet. If it needs to be lower, it needs to be lower. I mean, it's up to the Willow Commission.
Yeah, I'd say we want to do something like between 3 and 4 feet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
What do you all think?
And just
Sounds
because,
good.
because it needs to be, you know,
3.5, is that what I heard?
So are
I like
the new
round
apartments of
numbers.
the cove, is that something that I could go look at visually to say that's under the old standard, the ground floor?
Well, now we implemented it as 5 feet. So if pretend this window, you're standing outside, the bottom of it is here. We get applicants that want to put the bottom of it way up there. And so we're trying to say, where does the bottom of the window need to be on the ground floor? The standard before this was, there are no transparency standards before 2004.
Yeah.
And so, really the question for the commission is, where does the bottom of a window need to be for you to engage with it to meet the intent of the standard, which
And
absolutely.
I think 3 is infinitely better, because then a desk can be there, and then the person's looking out the desk, you're looking in at them.
And you're talking
Just like that
from,
window right there.
Yeah.
from the
That window,
outside of
I
the
should
building.
have brought my tape measure.
There
Yes.
could be the main floor of the building, if you're inside,
Yes,
could be within a foot of the bottom of the window or less. So it changes from your point of perspective.
it's a good viewpoint. Okay, so transparency at 3 feet.
And then
I
you
need to
asked
see-
about
I
if the
describing it's
ground
not
floor
helping me at all.
is
Do we-
residential, do we still want to have 30/60?
I don't know what that means.
Or do we want to just have 15 so that whoever's living on the ground floor is on display?
I think we kind of did an error and it was 15 feet. You want to go back to 15 feet? This doesn't say 15 feet for residential.
15 feet or 15%?
Or 15%.
15%,
I
Yeah.
see. 15%?
yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I was,
Yeah,
that's
I-
what I was having a hard time visualizing, is what does 15% look like? Can you name a building that has 15%, that has that standard?
What about the building at
Maybe the
Walla
McCall
Walla?
building?
Let's figure out what the code was. I mean, it's got to
That
be,
exceeds it, or?
What about the building at
That
Walla
meets it-
Walla and
That meets it
Walla?
exactly.
Has that got a 15% standard?
which
Because
building?
that sounds
The
small.
one that's got the dentist's office and the Oregonian used to be in it, and
At where?
That's got to be more than that.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like
It's
much.
got to be more than, it's not much. It's residential. It would be like, you have your unit with one window.
When you walk
And then from an
you can see
inside, from an inside aesthetic, we just got done with this big building down on A Avenue. It was it's an apartment building. That was where the Weiser building used to be. And they have a lot of windows, and I know for a fact that they exceed 15%, they're probably up around 25%. And a lot of the units are really nice, but some of them are kind of dark. And there really isn't very much window there, even though there's a lot of window on the outside. So I guess I'm looking from the inside out, and what kind of
but there's your variation in cost.
So
Yeah.
here's,
Because the
Oh,
dark
yeah.
ones are gonna rent for less than the really bright sunshiny ones.
Right, but
You know the-
how much is it to get more window in?
this is a little bit more, but you know the Orange Theory building, the
Yeah.
one by the movie theater?
Right,
So facing Beaver Creek, that's 60%, like kind of right on the money. And then they're facing the interior roadway is like about
Colton.
60%, Colton Place. And then on the other side is like 30% right on the money.
So the side facing the
Hospital-
vacant lot,
Facing the movie theater.
facing the movie
Where you
theater, yeah,
kinda
there's
like
not a
curve
lot of
around.
windows there.
It's not a lot of windows, that's about like 30%.
Okay, well, I'll be there tomorrow, I will take a look at it.
So you could think of, what are some other new, so I can give you examples in terms of commercial and which is front facing facade, 60%, sides are 30. The new hospital
haven't
medical
seen it.
office building,
I haven't gone
the
to see it.
facade that
Really.
faces,
Division.
15th or Division.
if you're standing on Division looking at the building, it would be the right facade. So it has like a main entrance and like a cover, that's 15% on that one. So it's like, if you're walking from Division to the front door, that facade, that's 15% or 30%
30%.
rather.
Yeah, it sounds like 15 is too small.
So, but we're only talking about multifamily. So
Right,
the standard now in multifamily is 15% transparency. You'll see like a unit with a 3x5 window, it's about 15%. I mean, generally, there's some little space
Yeah.
on the end of the building where stairs go, where there's not, or.
I
you
think
can
that's,
get
I think it's too small.
Well, but you also have to think about the size of the apartment and the walls that are breaking up the bedrooms and all that. And, you know, if we say 20%, does that mean that we're pushing a bedroom out? Because they don't have the room to put the bedroom in, you know, because they have to have the window and then the support beams. And
Well, I guess I was
They've
thinking
gotta
more
have
along the lines of a
egress,
more
that's part-
creative
right.
design than a 3050 on
And-
every unit, bing, 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 all the way down the building.
And then also,
But-
we were hoping to make it easier for residential if we have increased standards. We have to
Yeah.
recognize that that makes it more expensive and harder.
Okay.
So this includes the 15% windows on every floor, which doesn't exist. So you can think, that's probably more standards now. And then if you expand the 15%, perhaps the price may go up, which might be countered to actually having more units, in pencil. And then the other thing, if you guys can talk about too, is do we care if there's windows on the back side of buildings?
Yes.
Residential, commercial or not, or I mean, multifamily or not? Do we care if they're on the side? Do we care? And,
Yes.
okay.
Because,
You could care and should care, except we don't know what's on the backside across the property line from that building. If it's another brick wall, you may get a little light in, but you're not getting much view.
So where's that minimum?
Yeah, yeah.
no, but the other side of it is, you know, if there isn't, then you will create that brick wall.
Yeah, for the next
So,
guy that's
right.
gonna build something,
So,
yeah.
I think,
We don't have all of the parameters
Yeah.
at
Or
our
you could
disposal.
say if there's a brick wall facing you,
No,
is there
I think-
is there some,
I don't think you want to go with what if and maybe perhapses. I think you just say, yes, there needs to be windows on the back facade.
okay.
And maybe it's only 10% or whatever, or it is 15 and later on we change the fronts and sides to a bigger number, but,
So the
Do we
back could
reach
be
a
a little bit
and,
lower.
and potentially the back might be the only way they can get out if the building's on fire and the firemen have to break the window out and let them out. I mean,
They'll go through separate building.
well, I understand, but I'm just saying, you know,
I just made a note
It's
to myself
options.
to go look at the building.
so.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure that we had a discussion about that.
Okay, so the fourth bullet down is third bullet down. Your requirement to have a specific number of bedrooms in multifamily buildings is proposed to be struck. This was a recommendation from the project advisory team.
It's fine.
Yeah, and this tall ceilings is no big deal either.
Yeah. tall ceilings.
Yeah, that's,
So that would go away. The flexibility for open space,
Are you on 289?
yeah, let me get to
What
that.
happened to K?
Page 290,
On 288, what happened to K?
It's still there.
Where,
K?
I thought we didn't allow drive-throughs anymore.
They're allowed in some places.
it's
General
called out
commercial.
as a use, conditional use in the mixed-use zones. And it's always been permitted in the commercial and.
It's
zones.
prohibited in MUD, but allowed in MUC.
Yeah,
or
MUD
under
prohibits
conditional
it.
use.
Okay,
Yep. And Willamette Falls District?
yeah, we
prohibits.
didn't allow them in Willamette Falls.
Yeah, no, think general commercial.
Okay, so
For the
general
most part.
commercial would be Hilltop.
Yeah,
So if the next big Sonic comes in, we're good to go.
Or like the Dutch Brothers that got built in Berry Hill.
yeah.
Yeah, not the one on Malala Avenue, which
right, anyway, go ahead.
yesterday I saw 3 cars parked in the bike lane trying to get into it. Not good.
And final bullet here on this slide is with respect to the parking minimums. So we're proposing that go to 1 space per unit for multifamily.
And I'm okay with that because apartment people are less likely to have 3, 4, 5 cars.
That's not true. You got people doubling up and they all have cars.
I know, but they're less likely.
No, I think that's a misnomer.
Okay.
And then Pete, can you talk a little bit about the open space? I'm gonna kind of touch on it
Yeah,
there.
so the open space.
290.
The way it is in the current code is it's defined into common open space and private open space, and private common open space, and some applies in some zones, and some applies mixed use zones, and R2's, it's very complicated. Proposal here is that,
This is,
we would rename that usable open space requirement, and it would be applicable in residential zones. Each development would provide a minimum of 100 square feet of open space per dwelling unit, so that would apply in the R2 zone. In the commercial and mixed-use zones, each development shall provide a minimum of 50 square feet of open space per unit. Specifies required setback areas do not count towards the open space requirement unless those setback areas are incorporated into spaces that meet all the other requirements of the section, so that you're not just counting unusable spaces.
But if it creates a courtyard effect on the ground floor, the in and outs that are all grass that kids can sit in or whatever, then it would count.
It could count in that case. There's some minimum landscaping requirements associated with that, which are cross-referenced 1762-050. If those spaces meet the requirements of both this section and that section. So you can count landscaping if it meets both sections. These spaces for common open space has to be accessible to all residents of the development and includes courtyards, decks, gardens, play areas, common rooftop decks and terraces, and other multi-purpose recreational or green spaces. This may be used to meet 100% of the usable open space requirement. And then we have some design standards with respect to dimensions. They have to be at least 12 feet with a minimum size of 200 square feet for developments of 20 units or less. And 21 or more units, we have to be at least 20 feet with a minimum size of 400 square feet. It must include a mix of natural and recreational amenities. Again, sites with 20 units or less must provide a minimum of 2 of the following amenities: landscaping, gardening areas, large trees expected to reach over 18 inches diameter at maturity, seating, pedestrian scale lighting, hard surface pedestrian paths, paved courtyards or plazas, gazebos or other decorative shelters, play structures for children, sports courts, or an alternative amenity as approved by the community development director. And if you're 21 or more units, then you have to provide at least 3 of those amenities.
So would 2 basketball courts count as 2 amenities?
Just the pole and
Well,
the basket.
I mean,
So the question really should be, do these have to be applied individually, or can they
Yeah.
lumped together?
What do you mean lumped together?
Or you would provide 3 of one?
Large trees, so you should be able to
You could, okay, I see what you're saying.
have 2 gazebos.
We could specify that.
Sports.
I mean,
Yeah.
and if they're 2 basketball courts, they're not green spaces, they're hard cement
They're
surfaces.
hardscapes.
So
Yeah.
do they count or don't they? Because they're open spaces, but they're not green spaces.
Yeah, private space and public space and.
What do they have for sports courts? Aren't some of those permeable?
Yeah, some of them are
Some
grass and some are
Yep.
clay, but
Yep.
most of them are cement.
Yeah, or asphalt.
So the list could be divided into natural and then hardscape potentially, and then require
Yeah.
1 of each or at least 2 of it. Yeah.
shall feature a mix of natural and recreational.
Yeah, but
Shall.
it doesn't
Yes, but they can have
specify.
1 large tree going over the top of
At least
this-
1
the basketball
natural,
court.
at least 1 natural and at least 1 recreational,
Yeah.
something like that.
And the
Okay.
basketball hoop mounts on the tree.
No, we can't be
We were at
mounting a
10.
basketball hoop on the tree, Vern. That
I
would
started out that way.
I didn't get, can going back to the parking minimum, did you guys, I know Portland's going to that less than 1, but do we know the demographics of what's
What's currently happening?
currently happening in our area?
We would if we had a needs analysis.
I can access that too. So, what I have noticed in some of those demographics I see on the commercial side is that it's what kind of Denise said is there is joint people
Tenancies.
living, joint tenants. So the 1 per unit, 1.25, 1.5 per unit instead of per bedrooms. Just a suggestion, just because of the demographics as we're seeing, the multi-generational family living. I had a
Well, it's
duplex.
just that people can't afford to rent the place on their own, so they get a roommate. And they each have cars because they work different places.
Right, but if you're gonna just go 1, then you're gonna have
So
a developer.
you were explaining about
Well,
a multi-generational in one of your.
yeah, I
so-
just had one of our rentals came up and there were many people that were looking at it. It was families. So,
That had more than one vehicle,
yes, yeah.
Drinking problem.
yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, and I'm good with that. I think,
Do we have 1 per unit or 1 per, you're saying 1 per bedroom unit or 1 per?
well, no, that's what it used to be is,
One apartment, 1 1 parking space,
well, he's saying it should be like 1.5.
1.5
Per unit.
per
Yeah.
unit.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, I
No.
like that suggestion.
There's 35 bedrooms, so there should be 32 parking spaces or whatever, yeah.
So that would apply to like studios and stuff as well, or are you, okay.
I have no
And then
situation
we
with a studio,
round-
there's 2 people live in it and they have 2 cars.
We're just trying to set the minimum if
I would,
that's,
We round up?
I'm always gonna look towards less parking.
I would like to
Less.
throw 2 bits into this. I have properties in Northwest Portland, and what I see over there, and because I was invested into the area, all of the Pearl area, they developed all of that, and Denise knows that, and with the idea that a lot of those buildings were developed without.
Thank you, Adam.
And what ended up happening is the whole area is flooded, no matter what the transit equation was, with off-street parking everywhere. And today's mode, when I'm looking at the transportation problems we have, everybody is sitting there, SOVs are more the norm than anything we've ever had. The further you get away from the the job centers, we're not a job center. Everybody is, and you can't satisfy last mile. Everybody's got cars. And I just think that don't underestimate the parking needs if I'm building middle class.
I'm in the Pearl every day, and it's true, and partially attributed to all of the constraints with construction and all
Oh,
the
that's a-
crews that are
that's a
coming
big
in,
one, yeah.
taking up all of that on-street parking. But that problem, what it leads to is more transit use.
Yeah.
More people are taking the bus and not driving in.
Yeah, and I wish that we had more transit here, but I just like what was being said. I have property in Northwest 23rd, and I'm really not that far from streetcar. And I'm just telling you, but it's still a mess. And they put parking meters all around me and everywhere, so everybody now is scrambling like crazy for what to do.
And that's why the buzz is now bike parking. All the
Get
new
some scooters,
developments.
scooter parking.
And scooter parking. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and you have people, my first floors are all commercial. And so when I've got people, everybody's trying to come in and find a place to park and and they're trying to satisfy the commercial needs.
So what is it gonna take you to, instead of driving there, to taking a streetcar or biking, so you're no longer part of the problem?
And I have asked that question many times, not only to myself, but to my wife. My wife says, no way in hell. Okay, period.
Right.
End of statement. Okay. And I have gone to sports events and done some things that I feel like I can defend myself. And so, but
Too bad you can't just walk down the street and get on the streetcar that takes you all the way into the theater district in Portland.
yeah, I know, but all I'm telling you is that we're out here and we're in SUV heaven because we don't
We're in the
have.
hinterlands.
Because 33, I'm worried about trying to get buses up to the college that doesn't take 45 minutes.
So,
I just wanted to acknowledge too for single one bedrooms or less than studios, the word cannot remember. You would be raising the parking minimum, so that may lead to more expensive housing in that particular case.
but if we make it, say, 1.25 overall for a development, he's probably gonna come out ahead on parking.
Unless it's all studio. I just wanted
Right,
to,
and if it's all studio, then that's a business choice that they've made.
okay, so 1.25, it sounds like
I mean,
the
I'm just-
commission settling it on.
I was just gonna tell Pete to just put an asterisk and then we can bring it back for discussion, but I think 1.25 gets a win for decreasing the overall impact of parking, but gets people, let's say, off the street, so we're not just shifting the problem. So,
Okay.
place market at 1.25, and then if we need to discuss it more, how's that for?
Do you guys want us to keep going or stop talking?
It's 10, we need to.
Okay, so
I would move that we adjourn.
can Pete do 2 seconds of what
We
we
said we weren't gonna go past 9:30 and then we were gonna reevaluate it, so it's almost 10 after. So I think we have gone up over and beyond the call of duty, and I think it's a good point to break.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Pete's getting tired too.
Whack the gavel. It is official.
I don't have a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstain? All those that are still awake?
Aye.
Okay, they've moved and seconded that we are adjourning.
You gotta whack the
Okay,
gavel.
hold on, so I can ask the same question so you know though. Can Pete give 2 seconds about what we're gonna talk about next time? So you know what to
I guess
focus on?
that falls under
You
communication.
know what I mean? There's
I think-
300 pages.
I was just gonna
so
pick
I'll
up,
make sure.
it seems like the most efficient thing to do is to move through the code based on the page by page approach. I was gonna use this as the guide.
Where we're doing the big topics.
Yeah, this will be on the overhead with the page number that marks where the beginning of the section is, and then we'll dive into the details based on the bullet points here. But I would like to get, you guys' input at the beginning of that introduction, so if you come prepared with comments, that would be great.
I will, once I get the comprehensive plan sections, and then I can finish that out, because we need to see the I need to see the
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have on our list to send, okay, so
Am
to
I
follow
doing
up on Pete's, this stuff is next time, this other stuff, we kind of did most of the residential stuff and this multifamily commercial stuff. So we're moving away from that to the other
Pete,
stuff.
I'm still having heartburn about fourplexes. I'm just not, I don't
I
feel,
think-
I do not feel supportive, I do not feel kindly towards a fourplex being the same as those other things.
We've adjourned, but we'll put that on the list of
Well,
stuff to come back to.
And I think that's just something we can have the discussion during testimony.
I just want to make sure when you guys are
Right.
narrowing your scope, so we're probably not going to come back next time to residential types or to design standards for commercial multifamily, to be the other stuff.
Denise, I'm gonna be in Olympia next week, so I'll catch up, but I'll send you a note to the
Lucky
effect.
you.